Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
Okay, Victoria Stanton. Victoria Stanton is on Shooting It Raw. Thank you so much for joining me. So I'm just going to give a little introduction. I've known Victoria Stanton for so many years. 1990-ish, 89, who knows. We first performed together. That's how we met, and that was really great. And have been friends ever since. Siblings more than friends. Let's call them performance siblings. And so thank you for joining me on Shooting It Raw. You've sent 5 images, and we'll talk about them. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Ren.
Before we dive in, okay, do you want to dive into the images first, or do you want to just catch up in terms of the COVID-19 craziness? What feels better for you?
I think inevitably, it seems like every conversation I have with people who I haven't spoken to in a while seems to want to dive into just how people are doing in order to get to something else.
Okay. Well, maybe we need a vacation from that.
Or we need a vacation. I mean, either is fine. I actually don't have a preference, to be honest with you.
Okay. Well, how's this? So since this is photography and Shooting It Raw, let's start with that. And then, so is there, of the 5 that you sent, is there one that you can remember offhand that you'd like to jump into first?
I think so, yeah. And it's funny because I don't have them in front of my face, and I'm wondering if I want to look at them, but I think I won't. I think I'll go for memory.
Right.
I mean, obviously I know the pictures that I sent to you, but I think it's interesting to just think about them without actually necessarily looking at them. And so your question is pertinent. In thinking about the pictures without looking, the first one that comes to mind is the very badly captured, sort of blurry, pixelated Buddha on a little stand.
Nice. Okay. I didn't know that's what you ought to start with. Good one.
Okay. Did you know that that's what you were looking at? First of all, when you saw the photos, was it clear that that is what was in the image?
No, but now that you say it.
Okay, so now I don't know if you're looking at it or if you're remembering looking at it.
I'm looking at it now.
Okay,
so wait, before you jump in, let me at least describe what I'm looking at.
Please, okay. you describe what you're looking at.
Okay, so I've got a blurry, pixelated image of which now I know is a Buddha on an elevated platform. The platform looks at least, I don't know, 10 feet tall, maybe even taller. It's hard to know. It looks like it's in Quebec with deciduous trees in the background, like forest in the background. It's in a field. The platform is on mowed grass, so it looks like either it's a building or it's somebody's house. And photographically speaking, a photographer might say, well, it's all wrong. It's pixelated, it's not sharp, it's a weird exposure, it's just like a throwaway image, but there must be much more to it.
I'm so glad to get that very apt, detailed description. Exactly. And it's one of the reasons why I was so tickled to include it, because as far as photos go, I mean, there's not much to say about it. But think about this. I'm going to put another image in your mind for a second before I tell you the story behind it. You know all those pictures that we've seen in the past and we still see occasionally in the present that are really, really blurry images of the sky, and you see a little dot and somebody claims to have spotted a UFO? I mean, those are not technically good pictures.
Nope.
They're really, no. But the interest is the fact that someone spotted something that shouldn't be there. This UFO in the sky, or they claim a UFO in the sky, right? Okay, you see where I'm getting at?
Yeah.
So this is of the same ilk, as far as I'm concerned. For several years, starting in about 2014, I had been going back and forth quite regularly to Toronto, between Toronto and Montreal. So I live in Montreal, was going to Toronto. And I was going back and forth because I was giving workshops there, performance art workshops. I was part of a series and it had me frequently back and forth along the 401. And my preferred mode of transportation, because it was efficient, super cheap, was the megabus. So you get to sit on this sort of second deck. And I remember coming back from one of those excursions to Toronto, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw this thing whiz by and I realized, holy crap, there's a Buddha sitting on a platform in the middle of a field on the side of the highway, looking at the highway. And the first time I saw it, I thought, did I just imagine seeing that? That is so odd. So I started asking people, have you noticed in your drives, people who I know who go back and forth, you noticed this Buddha on the highway? No, there's nothing like that on the highway. Where are you seeing it? Oh, I think it's just past, remember, I don't know, Ran, if you've gone back and forth between Montreal and Toronto, but you know where the Big Apple is, where you go and buy pies?
Yeah.
It's right near there, okay?
Wait, I want to interrupt. I have to interrupt for just to give some context, because this is good. This is good. Okay, so Montreal and Toronto, for those who don't know, is separated by about 700 kilometers. It's about 500 miles, right? And it's a straight, flat road that just cuts across. It goes south from Montreal down to Toronto. It's about 7 hours. It's a long drive. It's 7 hours at 120, or say, I don't know, whatever it is, 60 miles an hour, 120 kilometers an hour. It's far. And to pick out this one little thing on, did you ever notice this Buddha on it? Like, where along the 700 kilometers?
Exactly. And so the thing that I also realized,
it's a freaking UFO. It's a freaking
exactly.
UFO.
It's a UFO on the side of the highway. It's exactly what I'm saying. So what happened was, after that first drive, I asked one person in particular who I know goes back and forth often, who would be interested in, the two people who would be interested in this, and both said, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm curious, so I'm going to look out for it the next time. And for several trips back and forth, no one else seemed to see it. And for a while, everyone said to me, you're making this up.
You're crazy.
This isn't real. So then the next time, what I also noticed, so the next time I was coming back from Toronto, I saw it again and I thought, oh my goodness, this is 2 for 2. I'm blessed. I kind of feel like the person who sees the Buddha is blessed.
Yeah. Awesome.
I'm blessed. So, and again, my friends are like, I've seen it. Where exactly is it? And then one of the times I was in Toronto staying at this friend's house, and his partner sat me down at the computer with Google Street View, and we went across the highway on Google Street View we sat there for hours trying to look for it and couldn't find it.
Man.
It was painful and hilarious at the same time. So then,
too funny.
After 2 for 2, I realized, I don't see it when I'm going to Toronto. So when you're heading west to Toronto, on that side of the highway, don't see it. But when I'm heading east back to Montreal, that's when you spot it. So it's on that side of the highway. So, okay, that part I figured out. And I also was able to figure out more or less what exit it's kind of near. So then this became a thing. You know how when kids are driving with their parents and they play games in the car when it's a really long drive? This became my game. As soon as I hit a certain point on the route, because I couldn't remember exactly where it was, everything stopped and I was glued to the windows. Like if I blinked, I would miss it.
Yeah.
But this became my mission every time I was coming back to try and spot it. So at one point, on one of those excursions, my partner was with me, who was one of the people who said, I bet that you're just imagining this.
That's hilarious.
And so I had him glued to the window also. And he had his camera ready. He had his phone there ready. And we both spotted it at the same time. And I shrieked and I jumped out of my seat. And he snapped a picture and he got it.
That's funny.
This is after several times. And then another Buddha popped up, apparently somewhere else on
What?
the highway.
That's really funny.
And another friend, that one of the friends who I'd been convincing, he said, yeah, I've seen it. He showed me. I'm like, no, that's not the same one. What do you mean? It's not the same one. How many are there? I said, I don't know how many there are, but that's not it.
FYI, Buddhas off the highway in Canada, not really a thing. In
No.
Hong Kong, yeah.
But
Canada,
not
really a thing.
here.
Yeah,
Exactly.
funny.
Thank you for also adding that important contextualizing piece. It's not a thing here. So then there apparently is another one, but this one, well, apparently I say eventually I did see it too. So the last time I came back from Toronto, this time I was in a car, and nonetheless I was eyes glued, and I saw the Buddha, but the other Buddha
Okay.
Buddha is full body. It's as long, it's almost like an obelisk.
Yeah, sure. Whatever. Obelisk.
Yes. Except
Obelisk
that
if you're in Quebec, yeah.
yes, except that it's carved in the shape of a Buddha, but it has a really similar kind of stature to it. So it's like the whole body. So I saw that one and I thought, oh, that must be the other one that this friend was telling me about. And on the same trip saw the second one. I will refer to it as my Buddha.
Okay.
The one on the makeshift MacGyver platform.
Yeah.
That one.
Well, it looks pretty serious. I mean, okay. I also want to interrupt something because I'm just sitting here looking at the image, and snapped through the car window or whatever. And I don't know if there's dust on the windshield or the window, or the bus window, but in the sky there are two little dots that are also fuzzy and blurry. And hey, those could be actual UFOs for all I know.
They could be.
Yeah.
For all we know. Yeah, so that's that story.
That's really good. Okay. Why is this important? Why?
Why is this?
Because Victoria, listen, we performed a lot together. We got to know each other very well, the group of us in Fluffy Pig and Echoes. Your life history has put you, because it's you've lived it, right? So from somebody who doesn't know you, I mean, you've been in performance and art and creativity for a long time. Like, you are obviously committed, and this is part of who you are. So when I send you this request and I say, okay, well, where can we start the conversation from? Why pick this one?
I think I kind of answered it a little bit before, so let me see if I can figure out if there's a deeper nuance that you're looking for, that we're looking for. I think there is something of the surprise, i.e., I'm aware that when I send this to you, Ran, before even describing it with you here on this podcast, you will look at it and say, WTF? Why this? What is this?
And I'm going to look at it.
And I like that you will look at it and have no idea what this is or why this. So there's an element of, this is like a, let's liken it to a performative activation that I would think about in a context, say, of live art or of infiltrating artistic practice, the kind of work where people put something into the world without announcing it, but it's there, and then people might stumble upon it, be surprised.
Right.
So, and you used to do that a lot, maybe you still do in your practice, right? You weren't a graffiti artist as such, but you tagged because you wanted people to like stumble upon this and read a message and be like, what?
Yeah.
You have that in you too. I know I'm turning the table here for a second, but
that's
allow
fine.
me for a moment.
We're just talking.
You created a series of t-shirts once upon a time, 20 or so years ago, written in Hebrew, living in a neighborhood where you knew the local population could read what your t-shirt said, and you had really odd messages. They weren't offensive. But they were just kind of a little off.
Melach batachat. For those who
salt in the ass was one of them.
Not really rude, but kind of wrong.
Just kind of off. So like you did that as your own performative infiltration intervention. So right from the beginning and sending this to you, it's like, you're my first audience. You're going to see it and think, huh? So that was great. Part of it.
Love it.
And then the other part was, a big part of my practice has been, still is, continues to be, how it is that we at once insert these little interpolations into the everyday to create surprises for others, and by extension, how we become or can cultivate our capacity for observation and audience to receive these moments, right?
Right.
So this thing in the field, I felt like, I have no idea what the story is, but somebody put that there with deliberation, with intention.
A lot of work.
And a lot of work. And I became ultimately very curious about what the story is behind this Buddha sitting in a field. Is it two-faced? Because one of the faces is looking out at the highway, but does it have a face facing the field? Is it blessing the field? Is it blessing the highway? Is it acknowledging just one or the other or both? What's its role there? And what is my role, as it were, in having noticed it? Because the fact that I noticed it made me think, okay, this isn't just for the field, this is for the highway. And whoever does notice it at once, like I was saying earlier, it's like a game. And at the same time, I feel like there's an incredibly performative gesture in having placed this object into the field that normally in a Canadian context between Ontario and Quebec, one would not see such a thing, like you pointed out before.
Well, well, clearly you're creating it, right? Like the fact that you're seeing, your observation is what's creating that creative moment, right?
That's it. And so for me, it's enough to have observed it. I don't necessarily need to document it, but documenting it was a way to, mostly after I took, or I should say my partner took that picture, I sent it to all those people to whom I had said, this is real, and they had answered, no, it's not. It's like, yeah, it's here. You see it now. So,
Area 51, man.
Exactly. So there's this blurring of, this is an artful moment at the same time as it's quite of the ordinary, mundane.
Oh, that's great.
But it's one of those, it's one of those, I would really then qualify it as a truly extraordinary moment. And I'll say that again because I felt a little gurgle in my throat, which maybe if you have a sensitive microphone, it would pick up. That was an extraordinary moment for me every time.
Right. I love it. Awesome. Let's move to the next one. So, do you remember which one you want to go to next, or
I think I want you to surprise me and pick one. Is that good?
Of course. I really like the image of so what I'm looking at. You're photographing into what seems to be a window, and your body is in the light, or your face is in the light, and in a weird sort of way, because it's like you can just see your reflection. So there's trees behind the windows. There's the sun creating a pattern of direct light on the window pane that's got dust, so you can really see the sort of the light traces on the window pane. Behind it, or through it, there's this reflection. It's practically a mirror, but it's broken up. Like the image itself, it's sharply carved out, so you can see your face, can't really see your hair. I guess you're wearing a low-cut shirt or maybe a dress, short sleeve. Your hand is up. Yeah, it looks like it's photographed on Saint-Urbain. Mm-hmm. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
I do, yeah. I'm like, what? What picture is this? Just as an aside, somebody sent me a photo of myself in a performance context, and I looked at it. This was just a few days ago, and I had no recollection at all. It was so eerie. I had to write to her and say,
"You're right."
is this? Where's this film? I
Interesting.
don't remember this at all. It was almost, I don't know, it was a bit scary because I just
Interesting.
couldn't remember it at all. Anyway, she gave me the context, and then it all came back to me. But so I am in fact on Verdun Street. That's where that's taken. And I have a big, beautiful linden tree in front of my window. It's always the last one to bloom, so the leaves still haven't come out yet. And because of the direction that my window is facing, my desk, and exactly where you're talking about now, is where I'm sitting right now while I talk to you, except that it's dusk right now.
Mm-hmm.
At around 5 o'clock or so on a summer's day, the light just pours in through that window. And it makes it hard to sit here and work, but it makes an incredible reflection of me in the window in front of the tree. And on one of those days, I think for several days, I was looking at this and thinking, I really want to photograph this. And I kept not photographing it. And then on one of those days, I actually used a proper camera. I mean, phones do a good job now with their cameras, but this was, an actual camera, and took a photo.
So here's what's interesting about digital photography, right?
Yeah, you
for
can
example,
see what... Yeah.
You see, it did on the 6th of June, 2013. It's weird that I'm perving into this, but 6th of June, 2013. So it's a Nikon D40, white balance, all this stuff is there. And it's kind of weird to have this information just included. Okay,
Yeah.
but anyway, so as you're saying, proper camera
that I inherited from my stepfather. And I guess beyond the fact that I was curious to play with light, shadow, and texture, and the fact that it created a disembodied head, which is what it does, I liked seeing myself kind of floating in the tree, whereby the tree is outside and I'm inside, but because of the way that it joins the two together, it does look like I'm floating in the middle of this tree.
Yeah, it is quite, and it's interesting because the shadow inside your house or on your face or whatever really just cuts it in a way that's quite unusual.
I guess so. And now that I'm talking to you, just now when I was thinking about this disembodied figure in the tree, I'm remembering that when I was probably around anywhere between like age 7 and 12, my parents had a print, like a reproduction of a pastel drawing, I think it was. It was very illustrate-y as opposed to like painterly. It wasn't particularly painterly. It felt more like an illustration. It was very, very designy as a piece.
Got it.
It was an image of these children floating in a tree. Yeah. So I think that there's some fun relationship, I think, thinking about floating in a tree.
Some
like
kind of
that.
Echo, for sure. Of course there's a connection.
So I think aside from that, maybe there isn't a lot to say about it, except that at that moment I was excited to play with those textures, and I took a whole bunch of pictures at that time.
Cool.
And then put them away and thought, I'll do something with this one day, and today's the day.
Well, here we are. You're right. Ta-da!
Oh,
Nice.
and I did another thing with it lately, because I also discovered recently, which I imagine people like you already know, because I've been on Zoom so much, I discovered that you can put funky backgrounds to your... So I've been using that as a background, and it's pretty fun.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, let's jump to the other image of you essentially sitting at a desk inside a gallery, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Surrounded by a ring of kids and adults holding hands. Okay, so let me describe the image. Okay, so
Please do.
The light's coming from the top. There's you are seated facing the camera. There's somebody, male or female, with a back to the camera, sitting with a black t-shirt on a stool, facing you. It looks like you're covering your ears. Around you is like a ring of adults and children holding hands. And It's very warm colors. So the walls are white, very high ceiling. Walls are white. The floor is made out of wood. The ceiling looks like it's made out of wood. So it's brown and warm, and it may look like the kids are wearing name tags on. I can't really tell, but one kid has some kind of tag around his neck, and your expression is rather open, and there's So what's the story behind this photo?
Okay, so I am with my partners. Okay, follow this. Okay, the person sitting across from me is my partner's dad's girlfriend.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so that's Myrna sitting across from me. So on June 20th, 2019, so almost a year ago, I had the opportunity to go to France with my partner and his family, which is to say his dad's girlfriend, his siblings and their partners. We converged on France, and we traveled around together for a couple of weeks. And our first destination was Lyon. That's where we landed. And his parents happily were quite interested in going to look at exhibitions and things. And they were also really happy to have me kind of suggest the exhibitions we go to, because there was, I guess, an interest in seeing sort of more classical work. But I learned that there was a sound art exhibition happening at the Musée d'Art Contemporain in Lyon, the Contemporary Art Museum in Lyon. And I mean, listen, Rand, like, this was all about artists from the 60s and 70s and beautiful installation pieces, early video works and sound pieces. And I mean, it was a delicious show. It was so fun. And we walked into this room. It was just me and Myrna, just the two of us. And this work was being presented. It's a piece by Laurie Anderson from 1978 called The Hand Phone Table. So the hand phone table is a box. That's what's in front of us. And there's two depressions on either side where you fit your elbows. So there's like a little elbow holder.
Oh, wow.
You put your elbows there, and then the piece instructs you to cover your ears. So you cover your ears, and then you start to hear this story being told, and this sort of drone being played, this sound piece. So, and the beautiful thing about this work is that you have to cover your ears in order to hear. Right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's, Laurie Anderson and how brilliant she is. But this is an early piece of hers, right? Sound installation sculpture. It's very exciting to be able to witness it, but firsthand,
Mm-hmm.
So I was very excited, and I was talking to Myrna about Laurie Anderson's practice, and I was sitting there with Myrna, and we both decided to close our eyes. So we're sitting there with our eyes closed, and we're listening to the music and the narration, and at one point, I don't even know if Myrna's eyes are open or not. I can't tell anymore, and we can't see because her back's to us. At one point, I slowly opened my eyes to discover that this group of people, these children, had amassed themselves around, and they're holding hands. It looks like we're having a seance or something,
So these just sort of spontaneously showed up.
Yeah, so the kids were there because the kids are on a class visit. So a couple of those people, like you see, there's adults in the circle.
Mm-hmm.
So one or two, or some of those adults are like teachers from their school. One or two of them are from the museum giving the kids a tour of the show. And I mean, they came into this room to see this work and the other work in this room. And I don't know whose suggestion it was, but someone decided that they were going to surround us while we were listening. So there were two simultaneous experiences of the work, which I found so funny and really interesting, because even if the kids weren't having the experience that I was having, they were still being encouraged to have some kind of experience of the work. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, but for them, they're just like, unless I guess somebody told them, they may not think, oh, that, you know, maybe you're actually part of the installation or the sculpture.
Yeah, that's it.
You know, like they're just like, that's funny. That's interesting.
I know, that's it. So I don't know how they were being given a context or information for what they were looking at. And I imagine, I can't remember right now, after we would have gotten up, the kids would have had a turn to sit down and do it too.
Right.
But before they had a chance to sit down and do it, they had a chance to see it being done, I guess.
Right.
The work, like the thing about this kind of installation is the viewer performs the work, right? Because when you come in and you see this box, it's not doing anything. There's just a table sitting there, which basically looks like a box on legs, as you can see.
Yeah.
And when you walk in and see this box on legs, that's all it is. It's not.
Just looks like a random desk or a random table. Yeah.
Exactly. But the work is activated when the viewer sits down, follows the directions if they choose to, because you never really have to, but if you choose to, and then you have the full experience. So as a viewer, you have the full experience by engaging with the work the way the artist suggests you do, and then the artist is aware of the fact that the work is completed through the interaction, the participation of the viewer with the work.
Right.
And that's a thing that's another element that's so juicy for me in thinking about performative aspects in visual work.
Right. Here's what's really cool. Two things occurred to me. One is that what I love about, so these kids, of course they're told by the adults, now hold hands and let's surround these people. So just standing, holding hands, and think about the last time. Maybe this was probably has happened to you way more frequently than most other people, only because of how you spend your time. But when was the last time you hung out with a bunch of adults holding hands and let's just hold hands and either look at each other or just connect to each other by holding hands in a big circle? It's very flaky and kind of like, but here it's so honest and so kind of like, let's stand and hold hands and just watch these people with their elbows on the table. And I don't know. I mean, for kids, they have no frame of reference. They're like, this is for them. It's like, okay, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Okay. Did this influence any future performance of yours?
Well, what was really funny is that the reason why the picture exists, right, is because a few moments after this happened, my partner walked into that gallery, into that room, because he was off somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm.
He walks in and he sees that, and he's like, everything he can do to stop himself from like, oh my God.
Perfect moment.
And takes the picture and shows me after. Now, there's a significance to me telling you this. So the picture exists because he stumbled upon this and took the photo. And I didn't even know. I did not see him take the picture. I had no idea. Right? Afterward, he says to me, he calls me over and he shows this to me and he says, were you responsible for this? Because he very early on, he started calling me a troublemaker. He said, you performance artists, you're nothing but troublemakers.
Right. It's not your fault. You're just eyes closed listening to the table. That's funny.
And as far as he's concerned, this is my fault. I made this. He said his story goes something like, these children weren't even in the museum. You called them into being around the table. You conjured them. He's like, did you conjure these people into the room?
That's hilarious.
So I needed to just tell you that because that is also part of the story of this picture.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
Yeah. So I guess, that kind of answers a little bit, did it have an impact on other work? I mean, yes, insofar as it continues to feed my reflection, my ongoing reflection around how there's a really beautiful thing that can happen when we create space to stop and notice things,
sure.
Stop and observe, and I'm really stuck on this idea lately that for me, I'm not saying other artists need to take the same approach. I don't have a need in a strong way right now to make anymore. My big excitement is to notice and observe. And the work that I'm really interested in right now is work that in its own essence and nature is drawing our attention to something, and the something that we are being drawn to that's the work, that's the culmination of the thing. So
this is okay. When you say that, I mean, from the little that I've studied on my own right or whatever. So how is this different from, the ready-made? In the sense that
this is another version of ready-made. It's not, I wouldn't say it's different from, I would say it's in the same lineage as. That's where this comes from.
Yeah, Daddy Duchamp. Got it.
This is precisely where this comes from.
Right. Okay.
And so when we think about Duchamp, he's the first instigator troublemaker, right? He is the granddaddy troublemaker. And
as far as my aesthetic and my creative development or whatever, I mean, Marcel Duchamp for me is one of the most, he was one of the most, or has been one of the most influential creative artists or spirits. And so, that was kind of informing actually my performance way back. So okay, I'm certainly not trying to frame your work, but I find it interesting. This is how I'm connecting to it.
Yeah, well, that's what's important. That is what's important, is how you are connecting to it. And so I could describe it in a certain way, which might or might not actually resonate for how it is that you do connect. But I think it's important. I think it's relevant to mention Duchamp in this context, because if he would have been thinking about the ready-made as a way to, in some sense, eliminate a notion of authorship, and also really give so much latitude to the work or non-work, as it were, that an artist does, the way that a person who identifies as an artist can approach making, such that there's poetry to everything that there's poetry to everything that we could do, say, think.
Right.
That connecting to the mundane, the ordinary, and elevating it to a transcendent experience is, for me, that's the stuff of life.
Right.
In part because it creates an opportunity, if we choose it, to really value just being alive, being living. And so that contributes to, I would go as far as to say that contributes to a quality of life, because then we can be in appreciation of beauty and curiosity all around us all the time.
I agree.
A lot of the time.
I love what you've just been saying, because like every second is such a gift, and of course if the frame that you're living or putting around things is, oh, the world is full of shit and disgusting and then yeah, for sure, fine. But on the other hand, we are surrounded by beautiful creative moments and expressions, even if they weren't actually authored as a creative piece or whatever. Yes.
And that leaves a lot of room too for people to make and surprise each other, and I love that. I love that it doesn't have to be an artist who makes beautiful things necessarily. And I love that artists can really sort of dismantle and resist art too, and call that making. And those are movements that are always really interesting to me. Yeah. So a contemporary version of the ready-made would be someone like James Turrell, who creates these these light installation pieces for gallery spaces, but he also makes these pieces out in the world. So there's this very iconic work of his in the desert where, he basically dug a hole in the ground. I mean, it's a sculpture, but it's in the ground, and you can get inside it. And when you get inside it, you're looking up at the sky. So basically he's framed the sky for you, and you're looking at the clouds, or you're looking at the moon, or you're looking at a bird, or it's always changing, but it's always the same. It's always the sky, but the sky is constantly changing, and he's framed it for you, the viewer. And the work, again, completes itself when a person gets inside and sees the sky framed by his sculpture.
Sure.
So that's what I mean by this notion of, if something can draw your attention to, that's how the thing is being made. That's what's being made. The making is your capacity to draw your attention. So the sky is the ready-made in this case.
Right.
Interesting. I love that.
Yeah, that is very cool.
Yeah.
Let's transition then to the photograph. Such a Montreal image, and and if you put me on the spot and it's not Montreal, I'll be like, whatever. But it's basically it's outside snow, about a foot of snow on the walk up of stairs, and it's a tag on in the middle top of the image is the tag is bad. And then to the right, it's like the tag is like this weird sort of spray painted on this weird sort of comedic sort of face. To the left, there's a quote. I am not going to look at it closely just yet, but it's from Frida Kahlo, I guess. And then below that is a very colorful, illustrated, but damaged face that's blue, wearing some kind of skull cap with 3 eyes, wearing lipstick, but also wearing a 3-piece suit. Mauve and purple and green and very nice. But it's on what looks like to be mylar, some kind of weird fabric that's been attached to a broken down building. I don't know.
Yeah,
So
it
what's
looks
the story?
like a damaged brick wall that's been covered with this protective plastic. Eh?
Yeah. So what's the story of this one? And how does that fit to anything that we've said about before? But maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it definitely does. And I'll say some things about it that don't necessarily create a direct link to start with, and that is, yes, it is such a typical Montreal scene, graffiti. It's and there's layers of graffiti. There's like 4 different moments there that are all on top of each other, which I think is so great.
That is cool.
The part about it that I'm most interested in is, yes, it's a contemporary spiritualized rendition of Frida Kahlo.
Looking a bit like Shiva.
Looking a bit like Shiva, exactly. And so Shiva in a suit. Yeah. And so and it's a graffiti. I don't know what the name of this kind of graffiti is, Ran. It's when it's a stencil, I guess. Someone did a stencil, well, not a stencil on the wall, a stencil on paper that got glued.
Oh, right.
It's one of those kinds of graffitis. So it wasn't painted directly on the wall. It was painted on something that was glued. And so the thing about this Shiva Kahlo is that she's speaking. There's a thought balloon next to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thought balloon says, nothing is absolute. Everything changes. Everything moves. Everything flies and goes away. And I noticed this graffiti on one of the days that I was walking up, I think that's Clark Street in Montreal, on the plateau. Clark, not far from Duluth. And I'd been walking by there kind of regularly because I started doing Feldenkrais, which is a somatic practice, just up the street from there. So I'd walk by to go to my appointment. And this was around the time, let me see, actually, this was like 6 months after I started working, or maybe a year after I started working on this project around the impossibility, potential for, and necessity to try anyway, to do nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does it mean to do nothing? And what does it mean if I try to instigate doing nothing as a mode of making or non-making as an artist? So ever since the beginning of that project, I've been collecting artifacts that in some form or other speak to that idea. So when I saw this, the first few times, kind of like the Buddha on the highway, I didn't take a picture, but then finally one day I went by and thought, today's the day I'm going to document this, because it might not be there forever either,
mm-hmm.
right? And I didn't do anything with it for a while. It just sat. This is I took with my phone. It sat in my phone for a while, and then eventually I finally started an Instagram account. I opened an Instagram account because I knew that when I did that, my Instagram account would be a project. Because of how I like to work. I'm not, again, it's not a prescription for anyone else. It's just for me. I didn't want to open an Instagram account where I would show people what I was eating for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I thought, this is going to be connected to a specific project. And then finally, okay, this is the Victoria Stanton doing nothing Instagram. So then I had a place to put this. So now there's a collection of images there that in some form or other are speaking to this notion of stopping, non-doing, taking pause, creating intervals in time. So I liked this notion that nothing is absolute. There's always, anytime you think about nothing, you're always in contradiction, right?
Sure.
So nothing is absolute. Everything changes, everything moves, everything flies and goes away. So, I'm thinking about what's my relationship to impermanence, and what's my relationship to making, where I'm not really wanting to make, but I'm wanting to notice. And then what is my relationship to noticing this?
Here, if I may, just because, so just to put to step back and put a bigger frame. Okay, I am in Hong Kong. You're in Montreal. I know what Montreal is like. When I came to Hong Kong after about 6 months, I kind of went a little bit bonkers or 4 months or 5 months, because Hong Kong offered very little places for me to have creative expression, which is what kicked off, my photo performance. Okay. Hong Kong is a trade hub, it's a financial hub, it's a banking hub, it's a legal hub, it's a business. And I can just imagine. So I've met a lot of these people. In fact, after this call, I have to go down to Central for a big sort of meeting. Now, I can imagine somebody whose frame of understanding of the world, in terms of finance and banking and all this stuff, if they ever heard or listened to this and heard you speaking, you're essentially speaking a completely foreign, alien language. This idea of just doing nothing, which is practically is illogical, inscrutable, not totally opaque to the current way people are living, of life being essentially a functional, utilitarian thing that you do. And so here, this has been a kind of a part of how I've known you, is that you've really explored and gotten really granular into, or if you can get granular, really gotten deep into this idea of what is time and what is being and what is to do nothing. So as you're talking, I'm just like, this is makes such sense to me because I know you. And I could totally see how somebody who grew up in Hong Kong or in a kind of very utilitarian mindset would find you baffling. How would you communicate that in a language that they would understand?
I just want to mention, I do want to answer that question, but while you were describing that, and it does make a lot of sense, I'm going to go on a little tangent, if that's
Feel
okay.
free.
I'm just remembering An exhibition that I saw, goodness, about 10, 12, 13 years ago. I can't remember exactly how long ago. At the Tate in London. It was a beautiful group show, and there was a Japanese artist in that show. I'm looking it up now because I wanted to make sure that I got her name right. Momoyo Torimitsu. Momoyo Torimitsu created this robot. She was really interested, still is, I guess, in robot technology and looking at how to like create moving sculptures, motorized things, and you know that's part of her research. She created this robot, and she gave it a name, Miyata Jiro, I think. And what she did was she dressed as a nurse, and she had this businessman, this Japanese businessman, crawling on all fours in a suit. This is the robot. And she accompanied him on the street in her nurse's uniform while he crawled along the sidewalk. And that was her performance. And inevitably, eventually, the battery would die and she'd have to replace it. So she'd open up her nurse's bag on the sidewalk, and she took his pants down because the battery was in his butt. So she had to take down his pants, unscrew his butt, and replace the battery. And then
I love your story. I love the image. I love it.
And then put the pants back on, and he'd be crawling again. So she did this performance, ran on Wall Street.
Awesome.
Okay? In New York. She did this in major business districts. She tried to do this in Japan, and I think she was like barred from doing this in Japan at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think she took up residence in New York. She might have already been living in New York at the time that she did this, so Japanese American, but I think like from Japan and moved to the States as an adult, I believe. And I mean, I found this piece fascinating, and I guess that's a segue into answering your question. Like, imagine everything you just said. Imagine, maybe she did this in Hong Kong. You know what? I don't even know her whole CV. Imagine if this artist and this Japanese artist in the nurse's uniform was this Japanese businessman as a robot on Wall Street. She's basically saying the same thing in another form, right?
So when did you start Bank of Victoria? What year?
Bank of Victoria started in 2001.
2001. That's 20 years of banking.
That's 20 years of dismantling the bank. That's 20 years of, in fact, this whole idea around wanting to create resistance to a capitalist mode of production and consumption and a hamster wheel of not critically thinking about how we do, why we do what we do, but just doing it, is something that began. I mean, I really should give props where props are due. The very first sustained creative project that I did was in 1995. It started with my previous partner, who is a colleague of yours with whom we worked together in our Fluffy Pagan Echoes performance poetry troupe, Vince Tinguli. Vince and I did a zine that was aptly named A Perfect Waste of Time.
Mm-hmm.
And A Perfect Waste of Time was a venue for us to talk about all these things that you and I are talking about right now, back in 1995. And we did this, you know, on our own dime. We published once a month for 2 years. And we wrote about our perceived need to not participate in the capitalist culture that we saw swirling around us, of course, of which we are a part, but tried to find a way to not be quite as consumed by and subsumed by, and what did that mean? And
Right.
it meant for us really simple things. It meant, for example, that we walked everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It meant that we took more time to do things because it was a form of resisting. It meant that we deliberately, we made choices to consume less and like, these really sort of basic things. Plus, we also weren't earning a lot of money. So, I mean, it went with our own economic structure, but the two things kind of went together. So I guess like that's way, way in the background and way in the history, but it also is very relevant and prevalent.
Well, it's a pillar.
For me still, yeah. So I guess to come back to the question, and I know I answered it with an anecdote about another artist, I guess what I want to say is I don't know, shocked is maybe too strong a word, but I am amazed, Ran, by the incredible vast quantity of articles, books, like in magazines, journals, both like anything from the New York Times to like lifestyle magazines that keep talking about and writing about chronic overwork as being bad for us. Mm-hmm. And the necessity to create downtime and the necessity to not be on a schedule all the time. And everyone's writing about this, like from doctors and scientists, right, to critical theorists, to artists, like to psychologists. Everyone's saying this. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Everyone is saying this, and yet we're still in this culture of chronic overwork. And I have no quick fix response to the person or the people that you're referring to. I get that it's what makes us go.
Wait, guess what?
Yes,
we found
what?
the perfect segue to go into this COVID-19, because this has forced everyone to just stop.
Yeah.
Right? Like, for a lot of people, it's just like, oh, okay, I can breathe a little. Some people know. Some people are actually working way harder, right?
Yeah, no, it's created this incredible polarization. And I'm opening up my Facebook now because I just posted about an article that I read, 4 days ago. The quote from the article, the structure upon, and this article is coming out in response to COVID times, just to say, the structure upon which we've built our work, okay, even before I read this, the author is writing about the fact that there are people who are working from home, right? Mm-hmm. And having to figure out how to do that. But then there's also this sense that we thought we'd have time to stop, but suddenly it's like there's more things to do than ever before online, right? Okay.
Right.
So this author writes, the structure upon which we've built our work expectations has been hurting us for a long time. When you combine our culture of chronic overwork with a distraction inherent to technology and social media at a time when people are forced to stay at home, you have a recipe for amplified anxiety and shame. This puts people on a fast track to burnout. Right. So now people who are home, not only of people who are home and working, are working, and then also on social media all the time, or trying to communicate with people, having cocktail parties on Zoom, etc. Mm-hmm. And then there are people like me, whereby I had contracts, everything got canceled, and now I'm home, and now I'm trying to create a balance between like wanting to read about what's going on, not wanting to be online more than necessary, being online because that's my main mode of communicating socially. And suddenly anything that was of interest to me that I would consume, so to speak, as a viewer in an art and culture context has been put online.
Right.
And so now there's this like glut, there's just tons of stuff. There's so many performances and events and exhibitions and everything's online. And I haven't looked at anything because I'm totally overwhelmed by all of it. Mm-hmm. And and I'm feeling a certain amount of anxiety and shame around like, I can't see all of this, but I should be seeing all of
Right.
this, but I don't want to be seeing this. And no, quite honestly, I'm not feeling that much shame, but I
Okay.
am aware of the fact, that in a way it's my job as an artist to be looking at all these things, but I don't want to look at all these things because I don't want to spend all my time looking at a screen.
Sure. Okay. So this notion of doing nothing and of just kind of stepping back, and then we looked at this sort of ready-made kind of the graffiti that's the image of, in the winter if you're walking by, the graffiti on the wall, and then the last image that you sent over is because I believe that we can always make connections, right? And in a way, the conversations we're having is about raising those connections into consciousness. So the other image that you sent was of people sitting on the grass, completely different than the previous image, right? This is people now sitting on the grass in what looks to be, I don't know, the title is Chateau des Ducs or something. I don't know. Is this in France?
Yeah.
So if you can remember, or if you can see that image now, how does this image fit into the conversation, or is it actually complete tangential and nothing to do with it?
No. This image was taken specifically because, again, when I was in France, when I took photos, the only thing I took pictures of were moments related to le flaneur, people just hanging around, people hanging out, loitering, long walks, people just. There's someone there reading. There's people eating lunch.
Enjoying life.
Enjoying life. This is a place. This is a moat. We're looking at a moat around a castle, and it's the castle, Château des Ducs de Bretagne in Nantes. So it's like a castle in the middle of the city. And what's really, architecturally speaking, what's interesting about this space or landscape-wise is that there's a moat around the castle where people sit, like in the image that you're looking at, and then there's a giant sort of courtyard inside, but you're not inside the castle. You're just inside the castle walls,
right?
But you're outside inside the castle walls, and that's a space where people also just hang out.
Yeah.
So there's two spots, inside and outside, although the inside is still outside, but it's like within the walls. So like outside the walls and the perimeter, people hang out, and then inside the walls, people hang out. The main difference between the outside and the inside the walls is that inside the walls there's really no shade, and when it's hot and sunny, it's really, really hot. Whereas around the castle, there's trees and buildings, so you can find, if you want, shady spots. Also.
Yeah, so to describe the image, 2/3 of the image is basically of this shaded area with people sitting on the grass, people just walking casually, and then 1/3 is the kind of this castle in bright sunlight. And it looks very French. It looks very French, Yeah, it's very nice. So do you find that this idea of the flaneur or the loiterer or the person who just sort of chills out, has nothing really to do and is just enjoying their time, representative of this doing nothing?
Yeah, I do. And I want to acknowledge that I'm aware of the fact that I was going to say depoliticizing, but that's not true. I'm not bringing in certain political aspects or socio-political aspects into the conversation. I want to say that on the one hand, it is a privileged position to be able to just loiter.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there are certain facets, members of our society who, because of circumstances, sort of hanging around and loitering is something that certain people do because they're not able to do other things like work, or they don't have shelter, or so. I'm aware of the fact that it's tenuous a little bit how I'm placing it and framing and describing. But what I am interested in pointing out is that, nonetheless, or because of that, or it's complex, and people who, so to speak, quote unquote, do nothing, get a bad rap. There's this idea that non-doing is a form of not even, it's counterproductive, but it's also this kind of laziness.
Irresponsible.
Exactly. So there's something about it being slightly taboo to not do and to rest and to not be actively participating in production or consumption, because when someone's just hanging around, they are not actively participating in production or consumption.
Right.
And for me, that is intensely political right there.
Yeah, and it's a choice to kind of to remove yourself, to say, hey, listen, I'm not just a productive cog or unit in some big economic system or whatever you want to call it. I think it's just a beautiful thing to see people just clearly just kind of enjoying themselves. And it's interesting to see how they're spaced. It's kind of like they go to this public place in order to just chill out, maybe on their lunch breaks or whatever. And the people who are there as couples are sitting close together, but there aren't larger groups. There's at the most 2 people. Some people are by themselves. So it's there's an innocent kind of beauty. I don't know how innocent. There's this kind of simplicity to it that's extremely beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess I want to turn it back again to talking about COVID times, because I feel like everything I look at right now, I can't not see it through the lens of what we're living. And so I look at this and I think, wow, okay, if this was a scene right now and people were allowed to go outside and not, I don't know if they are at this point. I'm not keeping track as to what the government is saying in France and in different parts of the country. But in fact, people are sitting at the appropriate distance. And there is one duo that look like they're a couple just because of their body language, the way they're facing each other.
Yep.
But there's another duo sitting on a bench. And to me, that looks like they might not be a couple. They might just be friends. And if that was the case, they wouldn't be able to be sitting that close to each other. So I'm looking at it now and I'm sort of fascinated by just not being able to see it otherwise. And by the same token, I was looking at other pictures. There was another picture that I was thinking of sending, and I decided that this was my choice. And the other picture was, again, people hanging out. But there was a spontaneous dance party that took place on a beach. There was a DJ set. And this other picture was in Bretagne, so like in a different region. And everyone's crowded together, right? And I was looking at that photo and thinking, oh, my heart sank. And I thought, I can't, like, every time I see images, I know I'm not the only one to say this, so I'm not like trying to be innovative or anything. But when I look at pictures now of scenes of people together, and especially scenes of people together in places where I was, I just I feel just this melancholy. Wow, we can't do that right now. Yeah.
I understand that. We don't have to end on a melancholic note. It's not a melancholic note, but okay, as a working, committed artist, okay, how about we wrap this up by you telling me what is is there something coming up that you are looking forward to that is something you're working on, or at this moment are you just observing because this is a really interesting time to be alive in?
I'd say both of those. I'd say more the latter. I'd say more the latter insofar as, okay, so I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but, oh no, I did mention this to you because we've already talked about this, but I'll reiterate. So this fall, I'm starting a PhD at Concordia University, and I am very much looking forward to that. And the PhD that I'm starting at Concordia is in art education, and it's proposing a continuation, a sort of deepening of my reflection and research around the complexity of necessity for interest in carving out spaces of pause, doing nothing, And I'm very much looking forward to that. It will be online to begin with, so that's going to be interesting because it's been officially announced that schools will not be opening in physical form. And so what's really crazy is I found out that I got into this program just as lockdown began, just as all of us lost our contracts, just as healthcare workers went into overdrive in the hospitals, this polarization of people working too much, people not working at all. And just as everything came, in a sense, even for those working overtime, everything came to a grinding halt. So I thought, whoa, that's quite interesting as far as timing goes. And I think it's my business as it were, right now, to stop and observe.
Yeah.
Because for whatever it is that happens when we come out the other side of this, there's going to be a lot about what happened here that will be a residue that we bring with us forward, good or bad, I don't know.
And that people need help interpreting.
Yes. And so I feel like, exactly, well said, I feel like it's really in my interest to quietly observe right now. And part of my quiet observation has been to reactivate a blog that I started when I started the Doing Nothing project, because I wanted to have an online journal of this experience. So I started writing again and publishing through the blog. These are not finished, polished pieces. These are sort of bits and pieces of reflection that I will continue to think about and work from and work on. And I feel like I'm looking forward to, a friend of mine put it really well. She said, I'm really looking forward to thinking about, because she's also, deeply invested in wanting to contemplate critically what it is that we're going through right now. She said, I'm really looking forward to having those critical reflections and discussions once this is over.
Yeah, because you have to get through it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I'm definitely of that mindset too, but while we're in it, I'm wanting to not get in too deep, because I think for mental health reasons, it's important to think about other things too. Sure. But wanting to nonetheless, in some form or other, be actively observing. And that active, when I say active, it's just because there's a big attention, but it could, on the surface, it might look like I'm not doing a whole lot.
Right. No, it's okay. If anybody understands what you're saying, I certainly do. And I appreciate, but I also appreciate that it's coming from a very intellectual, very well-reasoned, even though some people might look at it and go like, what are you talking about? This is on, what planet are you from? But I understand and I know that there's a lot of thinking going on behind your work. And I've always respected and admired how you work in your process. So at this point, I think you just need to go through it and interpret and then live it, and then also see how you can respond to it, for sure. Victoria Stanton, is there anything else you'd like to add, or would you like to wrap this up?
I feel like we've covered lots of bases. I was going to say all the bases. I'm sure there's more bases that could be covered and uncovered, but I feel good. Okay,
that's a good cover. Hey, listen, we can always have more conversations. But thank you so much for joining me, and take care in Montreal.
For this episode of Shooting It Raw. I really appreciate it. If you want to learn more about the show and Joe or today's guest in particular,